All right, welcome. I'm Ebony C. Peace, and this is Interfaith Multicultural Community Ministries, IMCM's podcast, How to Community Ministry. And we have this podcast once a month, and we have our very special guest here, James Clarke, who is a Unitarian Universalist chaplain, and he is going to be sharing his insights into something called festival chaplaincy, and it's inspired by the example set by German Wackens Festival. And so James serves at music festivals such as Riot Squad Media's Camp, Punksylvania's Punk Festival, where he set up a vent tent. It's a spiritual first aid station. And also, James Clarke is currently an intern at Pittsburgh Veterans Association Hospital. So we're really glad to have James with us here at IMCM. And let me just tell you a little bit about IMCM. So it's new, it's a diverse community of lay ordained spiritual leaders, social justice activists, and faith based practitioners. And we advance an inclusive, anti racist, and progressive perspective of diverse multicultural community ministry. And our mission is to inspire and affirm people of faith who serve outside the boundaries of traditional sacred spaces by championing professional development and creating space for interfaith collaboration. And so, welcome, James. Hello.
Hello. Just a very quick clarification. My second year in a row will be the vent tent. The vent tent coming up. The first year I was just the on-site chaplain as a volunteer. So just to
Oh,
clarify. So um, anyway,
thanks
sorry.
for that.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, thanks for that. And
Yeah.
I know for me, when I heard the term festival chaplaincy, just all these questions came up in my mind, like festival, like does he mean music festival? And chaplaincy, I know what that means. So how did these go together? And then I had thoughts of, people banging their heads and dancing the music. And then how do you serve as a chaplain in that environment? What does that look like? How did you come up with it? Is this something that is already out there and that I just haven't heard of? And so I'm looking forward to talking to you about this, learning more about this festival chaplaincy. And I know there's the folks watching this are really curious as well, because there's many different kinds of community ministry, and this is one that I think is, not so known, but adds a lot of value and support to people who really need it. So, if you could share with us just a little bit about what exactly is festival chaplaincy? Is this
So
something you created or?
so yeah. I'm sure I'm not the first person to have the idea of festival chaplaincy. I know there's been some precursors to this. Um, you mentioned the Wacken Festival in Germany, and they have something very close to this effect as well. Um, and I think Bloodstock in the UK has something equivalent to that as well. There's an organization called the Order of the Black Sheep. They're doing this at Bloodstock, and um, now, granted, that is, I think the Order of the Black Sheep is specifically Christian chaplains, but the person who runs that, Reverend Mark Broomhead, is very much of a metalhead. So my understanding is that their ministry is very consistent with professional standards. Uh, but festival chaplaincy can also include like street festivals, so on and so forth. Um, those two festivals are the only examples I know of thus far that have institutionalized this or something of it. If I had to make a guess, I would postulate that Woodstock 99 was a game changer for
Mm,
this because anybody who's watched the documentary knows that that was sort of a disaster. Uh, and that really sort of, I think, helped create the narrative that when you have an outdoor music festival, especially a music festival, where camping is involved and they're usually in summer, you have issues like heat, stress, um, dehydration, alcohol, whatever. And the medics and security people can get overwhelmed. Any medic can tell you there's an issue of triage. They don't have time for mental health care because they have to focus on nosebleeds, alcohol poisoning, heat stroke, whatever. Um, and I think you can see in the Woodstock '99 thing the cumulative effects of dehydration and stress. And as far as I know, there wasn't any like mental health support, in that environment. And so festival chaplains are people who are trying to help uh, provide for that in festival contexts. Um, and so the biggest thing I think with festival chaplaincy, unlike what I would call normal chaplaincy, is that
Mhm.
well, one of the things I've learned coming into it is that like you're pretty much going into this environment empty-handed. Like
Mm.
because of a variety of factors, you can't have any chaplaincy toolkit items with you really, because what I learned is in a, and it's generally true of public chaplaincy. Anything that you can't fit in your backpack now becomes an inconvenience
Mm. Mhm.
because now you can't leave it alone to go use the restroom. It's heavy, and so especially with public chaplaincy, um, or festival chaplaincy, not that you would necessarily get somebody asking you to read scripture with them, but you wouldn't necessarily have the availability to um, like use like a scriptural resource or something like that. Anyway,
Mhm.
I think most of what it involves is, well, first of all, people want to be heard anyway, and especially in an environment like that, one becomes rendered invisible. 10,000, 20,000 people. Um, I can reveal the article later or post it in the chat, but there's a good article from the Wacken Festival pointing out that the number one issue that at least their chaplains experience is people having couple problems.
Mm. Mhm.
And I can see that because if you are with somebody in 85-degree 90-degree heat with bad sanitation, no showers, uh, rare or overpriced water for 2 or 3 days, that stress factor is going to increase family difficulties. And so this uh, being with,
So James,
oh
I'm
yeah, sorry.
curious.
Yeah.
So
Hmm.
are most of these festivals a couple of days long? Are you spending the night there or coming back and
Music festivals typically are, although very local ones, like Western Pennsylvania has the Blues and Roots Festival, which is 2 days, but people go home every night and come back.
oh, okay.
Or at
Mm-hmm.
least one hopes they go home and come back. But yeah, like Camp Pennsylvania is a 3-day camping festival. Um,
So you're out there camping with everybody?
oh
And
yeah. Now there is an option if you want to get a hotel, and some people do that. You know,
mhm.
um, if you're doing it the first time, I would definitely encourage you to rough it with
Mhm.
other people because
Mhm.
you're more involved in the community that way. But I'm not going to shame anybody if they want to go to the Days Inn nearby
Mhm.
and get a
Yeah.
hotel. Um, but yeah, that's
So
part of the experience.
okay, so
Yeah.
you go if it's a couple days long, you're actually maybe spending the night there with folks in your tent.
Hmm.
And so, what does a normal like you wake up and then you go out of your tent, or are people coming to your tent and saying, "Hey, I need someone to talk to," or are you walking around with your chaplain antennas up, looking for people to like, "Hey, do you need someone to talk to, or can I help?"
So the first year, what I did is I volunteered to be on the health and safety team, and so I let all the people know, other volunteers know, that, hey, I am a chaplain on call. I have a certificate in psychological first aid. If anybody's having a panic attack or something like that, um, uh, let me know and know that they can come corner me
Mhm.
and talk to me. Um, and then the other part of it was uh, uh, I would be doing my sweep, and I call it my sweep. I'd basically be on patrol and I'd look around for people who were showing signs of what I would recognize as they might not be having a good time.
Mm, mhm.
Pacing, smoking, you know, um, crying, especially, visibly stressed, and I'd introduce myself, something to the effect of, "Hey, I'm a wellness volunteer, just doing a wellness check on people.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you okay? I'm, depending on my read on the person's energy, I may or may not say that I'm a chaplain. I think that depends on the context, of where you are. Um, and so I'll give you an example. Like in context, there's a really interesting relationship between organized religion and uh, and punks. Because on the one hand of the spectrum, you'll have like the Irish Catholic punks, like Dropkick Murphys, where they're very much okay and open about being okay with religion, or at least religion if it's not abused. On the other hand, you have like the anti-theist element where like having a collar saying you're a chaplain could actually be a trigger for somebody.
Yeah.
Bad religion, the punk band,
Mm-hmm.
you know, um, and so you might get the, in the extreme case, you might get the middle finger. So it may
Mm-hmm.
not actually, not that it would bother me, but it may not be helpful to openly introduce yourself as a chaplain.
Yeah. Whereas people may receive, I'm a wellness, I'm here for wellness help much more readily
Oh yeah,
without any of that other baggage
oh
that
yeah,
could
yeah.
potentially show up.
And
Okay.
and you can get a read on people very quickly, I think, based on that. What I also did, I had a T-shirt that said "free hugs" on it in big letters. Like you can see it from like 10 feet away,
Uh-huh.
and so people
Yeah.
would know that I'm approachable, and that um, I think there's also like the whole question of like physical boundary things.
Mhm.
People may not necessarily feel safe around a complete stranger who's checking on their wellness. But if you have like the free hugs T-shirt, at least in my experience, um, that was um, helpful for letting them know that they could get a free, physical affection. They could
Mhm.
violate that boundary. Um, to answer specifically your question, one instance I had is I let security people know that um, that I was a chaplain, and he comes up to me day two and asks me, he's like, um, "Hey, you're a chaplain, right?" I was like, "Yeah." Could you help me with somebody who's having a panic attack?
Mm.
And so it
Mhm.
was a young lady, and uh, in the course, I said, "Oh, sure, yes." I advised her to come meet me at this sort of like chill area where there's low stimuli, away from people. And I said, I'll go talk with her there. And I found out that uh, a member of one of the bands shared the last name of somebody who had previously assaulted her. And so she,
Mm.
she was in panic mode.
It was triggered by that. Yeah.
And so
Mhm.
we sat down, and a psychological first aid stuff came in. I asked her, do you feel safe? Do you have food? Do you need water? And actually, one of the things I had is a portable punching bag that you clip to um, like a desk. I say, hey, I have this thing. You want me to uh, go get it, and you can punch it. You know,
That's neat. That's your festival chaplain's,
yeah.
toolkit to have the little
I,
punching bag.
I had one of those big LO bean like
Yeah.
burlap, whatever you call
Mm-hmm.
those tote bag things.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I say, you can't have much in your toolkit. So, I
Mm-hmm.
had that. I think that was the only actual physical thing I had.
Did she use it?
Oh
Or
yeah,
was she did?
and so,
Hmm.
um, and um, I think one of the things that to that end, I think one of the things that I think anybody who's going into festival chaplaincy should have is um, training in psychological first aid.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
um, because of the fact that like you may get somebody who is either triggered by something or worse, especially at a big festival, you may actually end up having the immediate aftermath of an assault. It does
Mm.
happen, unfortunately.
Okay.
When you have alcohol and lots of strangers who are
Mm-hmm.
unaccountable to anybody, there's entirely a possibility that somebody may get like assaulted sexually or physically or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And so um, that situation didn't come up for me last year, but I can entirely imagine it. I can imagine it happening, and that chaplains might be available or needed for that.
So, you mentioned that in one festival where you were a festival chaplain,
Yeah.
you were a volunteer there and you let others on your volunteer team know, the safety team know that, hey, I'm a
Yeah.
chaplain. You let the
Yes.
security guards know, hey, I'm a chaplain and this
Yeah.
is a way that I can help.
Yeah.
Are there other festivals where like there were actual other chaplains um,
Not,
working
not
with
that
you?
I not that I know of. I know in theory there is because I know like Wacken and Bloodstock, like the Order of the Black Sheep, they'll send entire teams there.
Mhm.
So I know it's theoretically possible. Um, I haven't seen it happen yet. So I have theoretical knowledge of it, but not practical or experiential knowledge of
Okay.
it.
So let's say someone was interested in being a festival chaplain. Would you encourage them to go about it the way you do, which is since there's not like a call out for, hey, come be a festival chaplain. People don't even know that language, but they may have like a safety team. Hey, do you want to volunteer for the safety team? Or hey, do you want to volunteer for, the wellness team? Would you encourage folks to get in that way? Or is there some other avenue where people could go into that?
So what I would encourage people to do is um, uh, usually at these festival websites, there's some link, especially early on once the festival was announced, where you can sign up to volunteer. I think that's usually the best
Mhm.
way to do it. There's no guarantee that you will, um, be accepted as a volunteer, of course. But I think they're always looking for volunteers, especially like something like Camp Pennsylvania is a small festival. Like Sonic Temple, what's the other one? Bonnaroo. They're huge festivals. They outsource this to their own like security things. The small festivals, especially local ones, like state level ones, I think are going to be more inclined to be
Mm,
more receptive to that.
mhm, mhm.
Um, uh, and so that's what I would check
Okay.
out first. Uh, One thing I would suggest, if you really want to get a feel for the energy of a festival, um, uh, try a punk festival. The reason being is that, and with one of the things that I didn't realize going into it, at least internally, intellectually I did, but music festivals have different energies. So like the music festival, the energy of a jam band festival is going to be different than that of a blues festival or a punk festival. Punks are really high energy all day. So, and one of the things you're gonna, if you go into this, you have to understand that you're gonna be tired from this. Yeah, the security people may have like their little go-kart things, but you're probably not gonna have access to that, and you'll be walking everywhere in 90-degree
Mm,
heat. You're
mhm,
probably gonna smell after 3 days. You're gonna have greasy food, and you're not gonna have, unless you're staying at the hotel, you're not gonna have like access to a shower.
mm, mhm,
Punks especially, like they're like on like high frequency all day, and I say normal. I hate the term normal as it's normed,
right.
but
Mhm,
typically, if you think about the idea of a campfire, singing songs on a campfire, you think that the summer camp thing of like folk songs, acoustic guitar, people chilling around the fire listening to Bob Marley or Pink Floyd or whatever. At 11 o'clock at night at a punk festival, people might still be listening to like Dropkick Murphys, like high, or Pennywise.
energy. Mhm,
The reason I say that is because that's really um, a good sort of like means test about what your capacity to be a festival
mhm,
chaplain. Because if you can keep your energy going for 3 days with punks, you can do any other scene.
mm. I see.
Because although if you're not ready to do like 3 days with punks, you may not like have it in you to have that level of energy.
Mhm,
Um, that's another thing. And I know I'm going off topic here a bit, but that's I think an important thing to know going into it is that in a normal chaplaincy shift, you're talking 8-hour days, maybe. That's a long day. Even when you're not on duty as a chaplain, if word gets around that you are a chaplain, people may come around and info dump on you anyway. And so you could be doing like 12-hour days, you know, whether or not you intend to.
So
I mean,
what I'm hearing, James, is that it takes a certain kind of person to do festival chaplaincy. You have to, be comfortable potentially, being out in nature and
oh
not
yeah,
showering and
yeah,
not really having breaks and access to some of the, luxuries you might otherwise have. And
yeah,
it takes a lot of stamina
oh yeah,
too. And you might, the kind of things that you may run into as a festival chaplain may be different from, the other kind of chaplaincies. Like if you're in a hospital, things are
oh yeah,
kind of low key, you're walking from room to room,
yeah,
and the topic is pretty much the same, my health or my end of life. It's whereas in the festival, I'm imagining you can get all kind of things. Some people may be inebriated or
oh yeah,
under the influence of something from, and then you talked about assault to relationships. Seems like you would really need to have it's like a generalist on steroids almost,
oh yeah.
you know.
And I'll keep in mind as well that like, with music festivals as well, with the alcohol factor, people
Mm,
may often go to a music festival because they've had something difficult happen in their life, and they're self-medicating. So
mm,
you may still have, I guess, the festival equivalent of grief support, to deal with as well. One of the festivals, the local one I went to, a woman was there absolutely plastered drunk. And other attendees had known at this point that I was a chaplain, and um, so I veiled myself, and she revealed that her mom had recently passed,
mhm,
and she was crashing. I was told ahead of time by her friends that she was crashing, and so you know, upon request, I prayed for her mom's soul with her. She was inebriated, so to my advantage, like it was difficult to sort of get the prayer wrong because she probably may not have actually remembered whether or not I did it right. But I think there's an underlying truth there. Perhaps it's tangential or not, but I think in this context, chaplains were people remember chaplains for how they made them feel,
right.
not for what they actually said.
Mhm.
So there is definitely
Yes.
potential, given that alcohol flows freely in festivals,
Mhm.
that you may be doing grief support with people.
Right. Mhm. And
Um,
the importance of that ministry of presence
oh yeah.
as well, like what you were saying. So I'm curious, did you wake up one day and feel like I want to be a festival chaplain, or did you have you always been into festival music and you went and you're like, well, I'm a chaplain and I like music and let me just do my ministry here. How did that, align up for you?
So for me, I think with festival chaplaincy, I always had a sort of sense that like music festivals, concerts were my sort of beloved community,
Mm, mhm,
because maybe it's ADD or whatever. Um, and I'm sure there's some, a greater spiritual, theological answer to this, but I've never really felt spiritually nourished in houses of worship, in worship services. You
mm,
know, they're boring, they're tedious often to me. Whereas, um, in fact, on a mystical level, they would talk about the idea of entheos, the idea of enthusiasm, and communitas. I feel it much more presently at big music festivals. Um, and so I was never like really inspired towards parish ministry anyway. And so but, um, and I've always been interested in just like meeting random people where they are. And, so that sort of aligned with my sense of what beloved community was anyway, you know.
mm, mhm,
And so, but the thing that tangentially, very quick tangent, what inspired me into chaplaincy in the first place was originally I was a high school English teacher, and um, I started volunteering for a faith-based um, a nonprofit called the Foundation of Hope in Pittsburgh, and uh, they provide spiritual care and mentoring and such to people who are incarcerated in the county jail. And so originally I was trying to bolster my resume, so I started volunteer teaching a class on critical literacy. Uh, a friend of mine who, a member of my congregation, who was in seminary at the time, told me one day, "You realize this is chaplaincy, right? Or ministry, right?" Get out of here! This is a ministry. And then more I thought about it, okay. So
Mm,
then I applied and I got into chaplaincy that way.
yeah.
But for me, the experience of just being able to have really cool conversations about like uh, cool stuff with people on the level, um, sort of translates into the type of conversations you have at festivals. You know, it's like
Mm,
because often people are talking about their spirituality by talking about music or you know popular culture, lore, or whatever it is. Anyway,
mhm, mhm.
um,
So this is what you've been doing for about how long? Is
so
this
I just finished my MDiv, and I first applied 7 years ago, but didn't get in the first time, so reapplied. So 6 years going into my
mm,
MDiv. It was slower for me. Don't let this scare anybody else away from my MDiv, by the way. For me, I have an 8-year-old daughter, and so
mm,
I very consciously made the choice to do like one class per semester for a while so that I could be more present with my family.
mhm,
Normally, it wouldn't take y'all 6 years
mhm,
to do an MDiv, so
mhm.
I'm a special case.
So you finished your
Yeah, I did.
MDiv,
Yeah, I just finished.
and are you looking to apply for a chaplain board certification, or what? Or do you want to like your title to be I'm a festival chaplain, and this is like what your path is going to be, or is this going to be one of the many ways that your ministry manifests?
So, realistically speaking, I think unless you were living in somewhere like Georgia, Florida, or like Southern California, you can expect that the festival chaplaincy season is about 4 months out of a year. You
Oh,
know, maybe half a year. So I think if you want to do festival chaplaincy, understand there's probably going to be a side gig. You know,
okay.
I think the golden standard, uh, the dream would be to be hired by a record company, you know, that does festivals, and to be like their. It would be like being the equivalent of like, you know, an agent.
Mhm.
But that's like a pipe dream. I think the most realistic thing that people can do is expect that they'll have a normal like chaplaincy job, and this would be a side hustle on the side. Um, you know, you may not necessarily get paid. If you do get paid, you'll be paid, I think, as another member of the safety team. So
Mhm.
like as a medic would get paid. But if you volunteer at somewhere like Bonnaroo or Sonic Fest, you're getting like what is it? I don't know even how much money it is worth of a ticket. You know, you get to see
Mm,
Red Hot
mhm.
Chili Peppers, whatever, for free,
There are
but
perks to it.
but you're volunteering. So
Okay.
I mean, it's a net win.
Mhm.
But to your question, I am looking to get board certified, um, and as it appears now, I'm gonna try and hope get a full-time job at the VA, and then you know 2 or 3 or 4 times a year do local festivals, as in within the state. No, I mean, I think everybody would love to be able to see, oh yeah, I went to Lollapalooza as a chaplain. But if you
Mhm.
don't live in Chicago,
Right,
then
right.
now it's cost prohibitive. Um,
Mhm.
and so anybody wanting to do this, I would say
Yeah.
do a side gig at geographically convenient festivals.
Mhm. Yeah. I wish that organizations would better understand the value of having a festival chaplain.
Oh yeah.
It's someone who, yeah, they can be on the safety team, but they come with these extra skill sets,
Mhm.
this extra level of compassion, of understanding, of being able to manage situations and support people in a way that other staff just, aren't, probably aren't really able to do. And I wish that, it was it's more of a thing at some point. That's my hope, putting
Oh yeah.
energy out in the world that, this is something that people would be willing to, not just pay for, but organizations say, we're looking for festival chaplains because we want our places to be safe. We
Mhm.
want our folks to feel supported, especially with these longer day
Mhm.
festivals, these 2, 3 day
Mhm.
events where, it's a lot going on. Mm-hmm.
And I think, especially, uh, in the event that you have like a catastrophe happen as well, you know, when the catastrophes happen, they're bringing in like psychology experts, anyway. So, was it the Astroland a couple years back at
Mm-hmm.
Texas when they had that
Yeah.
stampede? I mean, that's a whole other tangent as to why
Mm-hmm.
that happened. Um, there was anybody who wants to know, I can provide a spiritual explanation as to why that happened at another point. But um, I think I suspect that a lot of festivals would like having people like social workers or chaplains on
Yeah.
hand in case you
Mm-hmm.
have a human catastrophe happen. And riots, and or unfortunately, there have also been to a lesser extent like suicides, happen at festivals,
Mm-hmm.
or accidental deaths happen at festivals.
And
Having
James,
yeah, yeah,
I if I may, I also
yeah,
think that how sometimes at concerts or festivals or whatnot, someone is misbehaving or someone is bothering someone, and they want to call security, call the police, and and I think there's room for a chaplain or someone just to say, hey, are you okay?
oh yeah,
Instead of let's handcuff this person or let's kick them out. Or maybe if someone does get kicked out, someone who can talk to them and say, hey, are you okay? And then that also makes me think about the safety factor,
oh yeah.
like people, we talked about drugs and other kind of adrenaline filled situations that could potentially, lead to some potentially dangerous situations. But I think, there are chaplains in the military who go out in the field,
Mm.
they expose themselves to things too. So I just wonder about that.
You know, on that note, I think one of the related fields to this is what they call psychedelic chaplaincy, and it's people who are chaplains who are specifically trained in like in the spiritual use of psychedelics or helping people, pretty much almost like strip sitters,
Hmm.
and this is part of the whole conversation about involving the police and the cops because I've talked to
Mm-hmm.
other people who are trained in psychedelic chaplaincy, and they've said, one of the sea changes here is the older tradition used to be if you encountered a concert person, attendee, and they were on shrooms or acid, the solution was to put them in the back of a police car or an ambulance and take them away. Well, anybody who's familiar with psychedelics knows that is a terrible idea because now you've pretty much guaranteed a traumatic memory for that person, and you have made it increasingly likely that this person will have. I mean, you put them into a scary unknown environment, and when people are tripping, they're susceptible to suggestion anyway. That's the
Mm-hmm.
claustrophobia factor. My understanding from people who have been doing psychedelic chaplaincy is I think cops and festival goers would much rather have somebody who is like trained in like this type of care involved than a cop
Mm-hmm.
or a medic. And medics are also like, and security is like, look, we got like a Hell's Angel dude over here, like punching people in the pit. We don't have time or the energy to trip sit somebody who is on acid. So to that to your point, I think also from the medics and security people's perspective, they would rather for triage issues have somebody like a social worker or chaplain so they can focus on real emergencies.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm. So I wonder, so you've been doing festival chaplaincy for a while, you've gone to different
yeah.
events. Um, Going into it, like, do you wish what do you wish was different about festival chaplaincy? Like if you could change one thing about the experience or about what it is, what might you want it to be different?
So I think part of it is related to the whole understanding of what chaplaincy is anyway, because I feel like a lot of festivals, at least in the U.S., are apprehensive about bringing in chaplains because they are worried that the chaplains are going to try and push religion on
Mm,
people, and
mhm,
that's not an unfair like anxiety because 80% of chaplains are Christian, and there are different licensing organizations, and there are organizations, uh, Christian chaplain organizations, um, both training ones and like recruiting ones, that are very specifically minded about intent on using chaplains for evangelism purposes,
mm, mhm,
corporate chaplains of America. And so I wish that more festivals were interested in, understood what chaplaincy is supposed to be at least, and were willing to have this element in. But I perfectly understand their apprehension against it.
mhm,
Um, I think that would be. I think the other thing is, um, with with chaplaincy is that while maybe unofficial, like I wish, and to their credit, I think Bonnaroo has this now, but they had that more festival had like a dedicated like space just for chilling out, like no like low stimuli. Here's a misting station. Here's somewhere you can go to get away from people, because a lot of festivals are driven by the dollar and they want to cram as many amenities into one space, and often there are festivals where you have to walk like half a mile just to get somewhere where there's no people. And in a festival with 80,000 people or whatever, there may be zero places where there's like no people. Um, I know in smaller festivals that's more of a likelihood because there's less people. But um, my understanding is that outside of I think Bonnaroo, uh, not as many festivals are having um, uh, like dedicated chill zones. The other thing I would say is I think, and this is sort of tangential to it, but not entirely. A lot of festivals are overselling the tickets, overbooking things, trying to get as many people in as possible.
mm,
So like there's one in California is like, how many big names can we get? Let's get Metallica and Iron Maiden and Megadeth. You have thousands and thousands of people, and it's way more than is possible to manage. Um,
mhm.
and uh, I think I wish I had that bit more of a restraint because for this emotional, spiritual health of people, um, uh, it would be easier, I think, on the collective emotional or mental health if they didn't
Mm,
try this hard to get this many people and this much money at one point.
mhm. Yeah. And those the chill areas or those quiet spots, is that where you think would be a good spot for a festival chaplain to be? Is what
Oh,
you're saying?
absolutely, yeah.
Mhm.
Because I think one of the things, if you're doing pastoral care as a chaplain, what you want, I feel, is somewhere where the person is still visible, to other people. You know, like they can still attract attention to themselves if they have to. Like the absolute worst thing you want to do, I think, is a whole creeper thing with like, hey, come into my van, come into my tent.
Mm,
No, absolutely not. Can it be tent?
mhm,
Yeah, something like that. But you also want, I think, a space where somebody can talk about whatever is bothering them, whatever info dump,
mhm,
without
mhm,
having to worry that somebody else might hear them and judge them. You know,
mhm, mhm.
um,
Okay.
and so yeah, I think spots like that, especially if somebody's like tripping or on acid, like taking them somewhere where there's low stimuli, and that's the big festivals have like lights big noise
Mhm.
everywhere. Um, I
Okay.
think. mm, Go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah. So one thing that's in the back of my mind is going back to that piece where you talked about the traits that would make someone be
Oh,
suitable, for festival chaplaincy, being able to rough it and tough it, being
mm,
able to have that stamina that's needed, being able to, that spiritual first aid where, anything can come up, literally. You're
oh, yeah.
exposed to more different situations in a festival environment than a non-festival environment. And I was wondering, in your perspective, are there any other traits, personality traits, or strengths that someone would need to have to, if they wanted to pursue festival chaplaincy, if they wanted to do well in that?
So I think a couple of them. One of the is the ability to code shift your language because depending on both the cultural environment and like the circumstantial environment, like how you talk with people is really important. I'll give you an example. Like I found myself having to code switch to language that was profanity laden at a punk festival.
Mm,
That's a language they're comfortable with, you know. And like if you're not like if you are observably hesitant to drop an f bomb, in conversation, I don't give a beep, whatever. Like you may come across as like like trying too hard or whatever,
mm,
and
mhm,
they don't feel they can have a level conversation with you because now there's a power dynamic. Well, this person's proper, and I'm a punk, so whatever the environment is, you know,
mm,
being able to adapt into and out of that thing. As soon as I came back from the punk festival, I had to remind myself, okay, now I can't be dropping f bombs. You know,
mhm,
the other thing is, I think is cultural open mindedness. Um,
mhm,
so like one of the things I think this happens in all sort of affinity groups, and not just music festivals. I'm thinking about like furry conventions too, things like that, whatever.
Oh,
Or
like the animes
oh
that
yeah,
dress up
yeah,
like the animals, the
oh
little
yeah, yeah.
fox ears, the
Or
furry.
comic conventions too.
Hmm.
One of the things I picked up on is the element of a sacred that people don't necessarily realize, and that is the idea that the exchange of information about subjectively new resources for music people will be, oh yeah, do you like this band? Do you like this album? If you like this band, you might like this album. Or comic book people, hey, have you ever read this comic? Blah blah blah. Like I think one has to be of the mindset that this isn't just a casual conversation in these beloved communities. These are a form of sacrament, like communion. And so, like, you have to be willing and open-minded to actually talking about, like, comics or music or whatever, or inversely, being open and honest with people if you're not knowledgeable, culturally literate,
Hmm.
because
So that.
oh sorry, so because
Yeah, what I'm hearing you say is, like for example, you go to a festival to be a chaplain because you are a chaplain and you
yeah,
enjoy festivals and you know the festival culture, environment,
yeah,
the language, the lingo, and that's something you understand. You know music, you know bands.
mm,
And if you go to a furry convention or anime convention, like maybe you watch anime, you're a fan of
yeah,
something, so you can have these genuine conversations with people in within their environments. So
mm,
if you want to pursue a certain kind of chaplaincy in these kind of, I don't know if I want to call them innovative spaces or uh neo new spaces,
uh,
like have some connection, authentic connection to that space. Don't just go in there trying to like, oh, I'm going to go to a convention and you've never watched the anime, you don't know nothing about it, because they're going to be able to pick up on that probably, or
and the
right.
other and the other thing added to that is be real people if you don't know this. So
Uh-huh.
like I'm not a punk. I like Offspring and Green Day, but I'm like a doom metal, like I'm like a
Mm,
classic hard rock, Black Sabbath type of stuff. Like sure other punk sorry, not other punks. Punks will a lot of them like a lot of hard rock stuff. But I was level with them. I'm like, look, I like Offspring. I like a lot of like Celtic punk. Like I
mm,
like Dropkick Murphys. I like Green Day. but I'm not a punk. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
I will definitely check out whatever you recommend to me. And if you say you're going to do it, actually do it because
Mm-hmm.
this is like a sacrament. Like if you're
Mm-hmm.
not participating in this ritual, you are like, and it is a ritual. You're like you're actually kind of not. It's like going to a Catholic church and not participating in communion if they're
Mm-hmm.
asking, or
Mm-hmm.
going to a mosque and not taking your shoes off. You
Yeah.
know, if you're not participating in that ritual of authentically exchanging information about music or comic books or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
you're basically kind of violating a spiritual
Mm-hmm.
ritual or understanding in that community.
Yeah, I love that you named that, that you
Yeah.
brought that up. And so what I'm also hearing is, so if you do go to anime convention or whatnot, and that isn't your jam
Um,
personally, like that doesn't mean you can't do that. It just means be authentic about it.
exactly. Own it. Like,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, own it. Okay, okay. I appreciate that. Yeah. Um, so kind of stepping back a little bit from the festival chaplaincy, you know, you're interning right now still, right?
Or just starting an internship.
You're
Yeah.
just starting an internship.
Yeah.
You still have your ministry career ahead of you. I'm curious about, what's your biggest challenge in your ministry right now? Like in terms of how you see yourself as a faith-based practitioner, as a community minister. How do you identify? Do you say I am a chaplain, or I am a festival chaplain, or I'm a ministerial intern? Like how do you identify, and what is like your best case scenario 5 years from now? Like how is your career lined up? What are you doing? Would love to hear
So,
about
so I will identify myself as a chaplain because I think chaplain is a functional title, not a functional description, not a titular title based. So like a
that. Mm-hmm.
soldier doesn't have to be a sergeant to call themselves a soldier. You
Right.
know,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
like professional chaplain is a title. Ordained chaplain, reverend this, which I'm not reverend, is a title. I think chaplain is a functional title like soldier. So I will call myself a soldier. Sorry. I will call myself a chaplain, but I won't call myself reverend or anything like that
Mm-hmm.
until I'm ordained. And even then, that depends on like my read on somebody's energy.
Right.
You I think part of it, part of the challenge is honestly even a disciplinary thing for myself because one of the things I'm noticing is a lot of people don't know what chaplaincy is.
Mm-hmm.
They may have watched MASH, you know, if they're in the military, it helps, you know,
Mm-hmm.
but a lot of people don't understand like what a chaplain is and the idea that chaplains are not supposed to push religion. And again, that segment of chaplains who are not was it ACPE or the board certified chaplains
Mm-hmm.
are not helping that notion. So um listening is a big part of chaplaincy, but I find myself like tripping up on like, well, I also have to like feel like I have to info dump about as concisely as I can what chaplaincy is, and I'm often apprehensive about, wait, am I talking too much, trying to over explain chaplaincy and not
Mm-hmm.
listening enough? Now, granted, if there are people who are very talkative, that becomes less of a challenge for me because now like I actually have something to listen to. But if people aren't talkative, I think that discipline of not filling the void with explaining things is a challenge. For me, that's a personal challenge.
So then,
Um,
James, what is chaplaincy for you? You said it's chaplaincy is definitely not evangelizing anyone's religion. You've made that really clear. Like
yeah,
that's a big no-no that you really don't appreciate, and you don't think there's a place for that. Even
yeah.
though some people are doing it, that's not what you feel chaplaincy is about. What is chaplaincy
So for
about?
me, I think chaplaincy, the foremost aspect of chaplaincy is the whole idea of ministry of presence. You know, and I wish I remembered which of my classmates or cohorts came up with this term, but the idea of witness and withness, you know,
Hmm.
maybe and
I'm gonna have to
beginning
write that down. Witness and with
withness, W
witness.
I WITHNESS,
Yeah. Uh-huh.
because you are observing what's going on in life and you're being present with them.
Hmm.
And I think part of the whole idea of being a chaplain is the idea of consent, like prior consent.
Mhm.
Um, One of the things I've what's the I forgot what the word for this is, but my rhyme scheme, organizational, schematic, whatever you call it, the four sins I see of chaplaincy are, and it's all understated. The understatement is that these are unsolicited things. Is preaching, you know, reaching, which is when somebody's talking with you, you're not fully present with you, but you're like looking up in the bookshelf. Oh yeah, I wonder what his diagnosis is, in your head.
Mm, mm-hmm.
Um, uh, Teaching, and that's the whole idea of like, you know, if somebody's info dumping on you or trauma dumping on you, um, they're not asking you for a theology lesson or a history lesson at that point. You may have anecdotes that you think are useful to them, but they don't want to know about what you know hubris is in that moment, even if you think it is.
Mm.
And the last one I came up with, I call it sneeching. Remember the sneeches from Dr. Seuss?
This is that one of the little animal things?
The star belly sneeches things. If you're
No, I don't remember.
if you're unfamiliar with Dr. Seuss, there's a book called The Sneeches, and it's
How do
a
you spell that? The Sneetches
yeah,
in S.
SNEETCHES.
Okay,
And so
Sneetches.
basically, it's as Dr. Seuss does, it is a allegory for racism. And
Mm-hmm.
there's two species of sneeches, ones that have bellies on their stars and ones that don't. And he ends up manipulating the whole prejudice against each other to exploit them out of money. But
Mm.
what the operative point there is, sneeching is when you are hearing somebody's like info dump or trauma dump, and you're hearing a voice saying, "Oh yeah, that reminds me of a time when I blank blank blank,"
Mm-hmm.
comparing
Mm-hmm.
their belly stars to your belly stars or whatever. And you have to remember, it's not about you. Chaplaincy is about the other person. And so if somebody drops info on you and you immediately go with, "Oh yeah, that reminds me of a time when you're now sneeching."
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, I got it. So,
Yeah.
no evangelizing. That was the first thing
Oh
because
yeah.
that gives a bad name to all
Oh
chaplains
yeah.
trying to do the
Oh
right
yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
Which kind of goes back to the niches, though. Like,
Oh yeah.
it's not about you, so stop
Yeah.
evangelizing. It shouldn't be about what you want to do. But you
And
said
so
no. Uh,
and then the teaching and reaching, which is like,
yeah.
focus on that person in that moment. Don't try and like mentally diagnose them.
Mm-hmm. No
Uh,
preaching, no reaching, no teaching.
and so in these conversations, I will ask somebody
Mm-hmm.
like after I've heard them, and I've you know if I need to, I'll say, "I'm hearing you say this." I might ask them, "Do you mind if I share a term, that you might find useful? Or do you
Mm-hmm.
mind if I share a story or a lesson or parable or whatever that I think you might find useful? Or do you want advice?" Is the other thing before you even say that. So
And
that, and a Zen level, I think that's like the essence
mm-hmm.
of chaplaincy. If I had to point to a model of what I think chaplaincy is, um, I'm gonna review myself as a huge geek now, but Friar Tuck from like Robin Hood and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not because I'm fat and bald. I mean, I am, but this is another question. Because here he is. He does have a chapel. He has a small little building, but that's very minimalist. It's not about his vanity. It's not like a cathedral, you know. He will provide sanctuary, you know, if necessary. But he's out with the renegades, the outlaws, chilling with them, being with them as they go through a tough time in their lives, whether it's Robin, trying to woo Marianne, or they're fighting against the sheriff of Nottingham. Whatever it is, their struggle, he's being there in the woods with them, and helping them in their struggle. I don't recall any version of like the Robin Hood narrative where he's like pushing them. I don't even know what. I guess he would be well, he wouldn't be Protestant because that was like. I guess he would have been early Catholic. But there's no point in which I got this
Mm-hmm.
sense that like Friar Tuck ever tried to convert Robin and his merry men, no pun intended,
Mm-hmm.
to Catholicism. You know, and I think that is a good model. Um, while I was talking, I thought of something as well to that. I think there are some basic functions of what chapels and chaplains should do, and that's provide community, uh, sanctuary, and ceremony. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and community in this case being one-on-one, but sometimes if you are actually managing a chapel, you will have some type of beloved community on more than two people. But I think those three basic functions are the essence of what chaplaincy is, in my opinion.
Thank you, James. And I think we can go on. We need to do a part two of this
Oh
because
yeah.
it's so fascinating. And what I see in the ministry that you're doing, this community ministry, I'm seeing that you can take anything that you're aligned with and connect it to your chaplaincy ministry and ministry anywhere. You can go to an anime convention, you can go wherever people are, like you can go and do that.
Mhm,
And it doesn't have to be something creative. You could just go and do and be with those
mhm,
people. Um, and so as we kind of and also I appreciate how we focused on festival chaplaincy, but then also looked at chaplaincy in the broader sense.
mhm,
How you see chaplaincy, how you perceive it as a ministry, as a career,
mhm,
and what you think about that. So that's really helpful. And I hope that that inspires other people, like going into chaplaincy, understanding what it is, what it shouldn't be,
mhm.
and how you can make it, intrinsically something that brings you joy, how you can find a certain niche within chaplaincy that maybe other folks aren't doing, and be in places where people need you, but there aren't chaplains there, because no one's thinking to go to these places. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The one final thing thought I will have, in case anybody was asking, is if you're doing this work and you want a way to try and like connect with people or reach out to people, you know, I think the best question to ask people in these contexts, unless they're obviously like distraught, and in which case that's, are you okay? But aside from, if they don't look distraught and they don't look like they need pastoral care, um, ask people what they're enthusiastic about, and then
Mm.
encourage them to tell you about it. Whether it's like, if they ask, "What do you mean?" It's like fishing, roller derby, bunk, dodgeball, whatever. Invite people to info dump on you and show genuine interest, and curiosity about whatever they're dumping on you.
So that's great. That's a tool that chaplains or aspiring chaplains or anyone doing pastoral care who wants to connect with others can kind of put in their toolbox. What are you enthusiastic about?
Yeah,
To kind of open those doors.
yeah.
So thank you for that. And just kind of as we wrap up, is there a question that you wish I'd asked that I didn't?
Um, the only, not per se, but the one thing I would want to bring up for uh as an important training, I did mention that um I did mention that psychological first aid is
Mm-hmm.
probably a core competency of festival chaplaincy. I
Mm-hmm.
would also encourage people to get training in both psychedelic chaplaincy, like how to be present with somebody in various types of inebriation, and also drug and alcohol counseling.
Mm,
you know,
mm-hmm.
because uh, that is um, that is uh, more than likely going to come up. The other thing I think, the biggest myth, if I had to say, about festival chaplaincy, and I've encountered this from older school chaplains who don't understand festival chaplaincy, um, is that you're only talking with drunk and high people. You know, the older generation chaplains who've never heard of this automatically assume that. Don't realize that, don't go into a festival thinking that you're only going to be talking to people when they're drunk or high, because don't forget, these are like 12-hour long, you know, or 24 hours sometimes, depending on the party, or 12-hour festival things. Like, people can't stay drunk or sober, you know, uh, you know, like, sorry, drunk or high all day. People are going to be waking up hungover at 8 o'clock in the morning, having had an argument with their friend, spouse at 9 o'clock in the morning,
Mm,
and unless they're like really close to the precipice, they may just need like morning coffee conversation as well.
mm-hmm.
So that, I don't know if that exactly answers your question about what the unanswered question is,
Mm-hmm.
but I would preface it or negate it by saying the biggest assumption I think people can make is that you're only going to be talking with people when they're on a substance.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point. That's a
Yeah.
really good point. Thank you. All right, James. So a couple questions for you, just quickly as we wrap up. Where can listeners find you online? Like, people watching this, they want to know, like, how can I reach out to James? How can
So
they find you online?
I think the easiest way to do it, on Facebook, I created a public group called Chaplains Who Rock. And I've encouraged anybody, any chaplain who feels that rock music is either part of their ministry or part of their way of understanding the world, to
Mm,
join it. I run the group, um, and so, uh, and that would also connect you to other chaplains who are interested in this type of work, or at least I'm assuming are interested in this type of work as well. Um, that would be the other thing too. I would encourage people, um, if you were, there's also an option of doing this, I think, as a CPE unit. You know, now granted, you would probably, like, CPE units typically have 20 hours a week, and you're not going to get 20 hours a week
mm,
or 300 hours worth doing festival chaplaincy. But look up the Sankofa CPE Center and ask for Reverend Karen Hutt. Reverend Karen Hutt enthusiastically encouraged me to try this experiment, as a CPE experiment. And if you really wanted to get, um, like, professional chaplain guidance on doing this type of work, Reverend Hutt is definitely the CPE supervisor you want, and the Sankofa Center is definitely, at least try one unit through them under her direction, because she
mm,
will enthusiastically encourage you in this. I don't think any other CPE supervisor would have been as open-minded to this CPE experiment as Reverend Hutt was.
mm.
So if you want to find out more about this, if you want to try it yourself, this is also an opportunity to do it through her. So
Thank you for that
I'm
resource.
not ending on. I apologize.
No, that's fine. Yes, I've heard a lot of great things about her leadership in terms of public chaplaincy.
Oh, yeah.
So it's great to name her.
Yeah. I can't think of anything else off the top of my head, but, yeah, it's a public group, so you don't have to be a member of the group to join it. If you're hearing this podcast, or I guess seeing the podcast, or either or, and have any questions, feel free to post these questions in that public group. And again, that's Chaplains Who Rock. And I'll answer whatever I have. I also put some resources up there, um, in that group as well. So,
Awesome. And James, are you available to be a guest in folks' pulpits?
oh, absolutely, yeah. I live in
Awesome.
Pittsburgh, so if you're West Coast, it might be a bit of a haul,
Uh-huh. Well,
but
virtual,
oh,
you
that's
never
true.
know. Yeah.
That's true. Yeah,
All right.
I will definitely go to West Virginia, Ohio, Pennsylvania, at least the western half of Pennsylvania, if or upstate New York ish, if you want me in person. But yes, I'd be happy to do guest in your pulpit Zoom stuff too. So,
Awesome. And James, I have one
oh
last
yeah,
question that I've
oh
just
yeah,
got to ask you.
yeah.
Your background,
So,
who are those two little folks in the background, and why did you choose that for your
so,
background for today's session?
so these are the phenomenas from the Muppet Show, and there's an interesting story about this. So, this is the most one of the most famous skits from the Muppet Show, and it's called the Phenomena song. I can't explain the Phenomena song. It's something that can only be understood experientially.
Got to
Uh,
Google it and
oh
listen.
yeah, uh, and however, the funny thing about this, they they did the Muppet Show people didn't actually write the song for this skit. They had these two like puppets animate them. The song Phenomena was actually, and get this, I'm not BSing anyone, was actually a song written for a softcore Scandinavian porno.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, somehow the Muppets repurposed that, and like nobody knows that fact unless you Google search it. Everybody now knows this song from the Muppet Show. I don't know how exactly. I've never seen this. I know of it. I never. I promise you, I've never seen this. I have no interest in with a soundtrack like that. I have no interest in watching it. Not that I would want to watch 1960s Scandinavian softcore porn anyway.
Uh-huh.
But the interesting factoid: the reason I like this is part of my philosophy of life is was actually inspired by the blues musician Buddy Guy. If you know him,
No, I don't. Mm-mm.
old school, one of the last old school like Chicago blues musicians. He's in his 80s now. Um, Very funny, very charming. I went and saw him in his blues uh, cafe in Chicago years ago, and he said, I live for the moments in which I can make people smile because it means that just for a moment you've forgotten about whatever BS is going on in your life. And so I figured, well, I like that. Obviously, I'm not going to claim it as my own philosophy. I'll always mention, Buddy Guy, because I don't want to appropriate somebody's direct
Mm.
words. But so this is my philosophy of Zoom. Every time I do a Zoom meeting, I'll try and have some wacky, silly background so I can at least have that buddy guy moment where I'm giving somebody a moment of serenity in which they have that, you know, uh,
Mhm.
BS erasing moment of levity or trauma, or not, sorry, they don't want a moment of trauma. BS erasing moment of levity or mirth, in seeing my
Thank you, James. Thank you for explaining that and sharing that because I just kept looking at those things like, what you background you got with us today, James? So thank you. You've mentioned a lot of resources, a lot of great points. I'm going to create a handout based on our conversation that people can download and just look at. And so for those who are watching this, go to im-cm.org for that handout. It'll be up there when it's ready. I would invite you to join IMCM. We have a marketing ministry mastermind twice a month. So if you're an entrepreneurial minister or you have an entrepreneurial ministry, join us twice a month to learn how do we market our ministries. And then join us once a month for our How to Community Ministry, which is our educational podcast. And this is our first episode. So glad to share this with everyone today. So thank you, James.
Thank
We'll
you so
be in
much.
touch. Appreciate it.
I do.
Take
Have a
care.
wonderful
Bye-bye.
night.
You too.